She was already restrained when the security checkpoint escalated beyond protocol. No identification, no clearance badge, just a woman who'd triggered every scanner in the facility and refused to explain the metallic signature emanating from beneath her civilian clothes. At first, no one understood why standard procedures weren't working. The response was methodical. By the book. Detain, verify, search if necessary. The woman offered no resistance, no explanation. And then everything changed. Someone in the security detail recognized something that turned a routine screening into something else entirely. A reckoning with a past that was supposed to stay buried. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ellen Clarkson stood perfectly still in the sterile white room, her hands pressed flat against the metal examination table. The overhead fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the tension in her jaw as 3 security personnel moved around her with practiced efficiency. Outside, the Norfolk Naval Base continued its daily operations, unaware that a ghost from the Special Operations community had just walked through their front gate. The trouble had started at the main security checkpoint 40 minutes earlier. Ellen had arrived in a beat-up Honda Civic, wearing jeans and a loose-fitting gray sweater, looking like any other civilian contractor or family member visiting the base. Her driver's license was valid, her visitor's pass legitimate, but the metal detector had screamed like she was carrying a weapon. "Step through again, ma'am," the first guard had said, his voice bored with routine. She complied. The machine shrieked again. "Empty your pockets completely. Remove any jewelry, belts, anything metal." Sarah's pockets were already empty. She wore no jewelry, no belt, no watch. The detector continued its electronic protest. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside for additional screening." That's when things had escalated. The handheld scanner had detected metal across her torso, concentrated in specific patterns that didn't match any known weapon configuration. When pressed for an explanation, Ellen had simply shaken her head and said, "It's not removable." Security Specialist First Class Marcus Torres had been working the checkpoint for 3 years. He'd seen everything: forgotten knives, hidden flasks, medical implants, even a veteran who'd carried shrapnel in his leg for 40 years. But this was different. The metal signature was extensive, deliberate, and the woman's demeanor was wrong for someone trying to smuggle contraband. She wasn't nervous, she wasn't defensive, she was resigned. "Ma'am, I need you to understand that if you're carrying something that's setting off our equipment, we have to know what it is. This is a military installation." Ellen's response had been quiet but firm. "I understand your position. Do what you need to do." Now, in the secondary screening room, the situation had reached its inevitable conclusion. Chief Petty Officer Linda Martinez, the senior security supervisor, had made the call. Full search protocol. Ellen would need to remove her sweater. "Ma'am, I need you to understand that this is standard procedure when we can't identify the source of a metal signature," Martinez explained, her voice professional but not unkind. "We've provided you with privacy, and only female personnel are present, but we need to visually confirm what's causing the scanner alerts." Ellen nodded once. Her fingers moved to the hem of her sweater with steady hands that showed no tremor, no hesitation. She'd known this moment would come eventually. 3 years of avoiding military installations, 3 years of careful civilian employment, 3 years of hoping the past would stay buried. All of it had been borrowed time. She pulled the sweater over her head in one smooth motion. The room went silent. Across Ellen's torso, from just below her collarbone to the curve of her ribs, stretched an intricate tapestry of scar tissue and metallic ink. The tattoo was unlike anything the security personnel had ever seen. It wasn't decorative, it wasn't artistic in any conventional sense. It was a map. Precise coordinates in military grid format spiraled around her left shoulder. Elevation markers traced down her sternum. Terrain features were etched in fine detail across her ribs. Mountain ridges, valley approaches, river crossings, all rendered in metallic ink that contained enough metal to trigger every scanner in the facility. But it was the small insignia positioned directly over her heart that made Chief Martinez take an involuntary step backward. A trident, not printed or inked in the usual sense, but embedded beneath the skin with surgical precision, its points catching the fluorescent light like embedded steel. Specialist Torres, standing near the door, found his voice first. "Ma'am, is that?" "Yes," Ellen said simply. Martinez had served for 15 years. She'd worked with special operations personnel before, had processed SEALs and other special warfare operators through security checkpoints dozens of times, but she'd never seen anything like this. The tattoo wasn't just ink, it was intelligence. Operational intelligence, permanently inscribed on human skin. "I need to make a call," Martinez said, her voice carefully controlled. Ellen remained standing, making no move to cover herself. She understood the protocol that would follow. She'd always understood it would come to this eventually. The call went up the chain of command with unusual speed. Base security contacted the Special Warfare Command liaison. The liaison contacted the SEAL team's administrative office. Within minutes, the query had reached someone who recognized the description: a map tattoo with embedded metal markers and a surgical trident. The name that came back down the chain was whispered, not spoken aloud. Clarkson. Ellen Clarkson. Martinez received the call back 15 minutes later. Her instructions were simple and unprecedented. Maintain current security posture. Do not process further. Wait for command arrival. She turned to Ellen, who had remained motionless throughout the extended silence. "Ma'am, someone's coming down to speak with you. Someone with the appropriate clearance." Sarah's expression didn't change. "How long?" "They're en route." For the first time since the screening began, Ellen showed emotion. Not fear, not anxiety, but something deeper. Relief, perhaps. Or resignation to the inevitable. She had worn civilian clothes for 3 years, had worked civilian jobs, had tried to blend into a world that didn't ask questions about the places she'd been or the things she'd done. But the map remained. The coordinates stayed precise. The trident over her heart continued to mark her as something that couldn't be unmarked. Torres stepped closer, his training overcoming his shock. "Ma'am, can I ask, why would someone tattoo operational intelligence on their body?" Ellen's answer came without hesitation, delivered in the flat tone of someone reciting from memory. "Because paper can be captured. Digital files can be hacked. Electronic devices can be destroyed. But the mission has to complete." Martinez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She'd heard stories, of course. Every military security professional had heard whispers about the operations that didn't make it into official reports. The missions where standard communication protocols failed. The situations where traditional intelligence methods weren't sufficient. But seeing it inscribed in flesh and metal made it real in a way that stories never could. Outside the screening room, the Norfolk Naval Base continued its routine operations. But inside, 3 security personnel were face-to-face with evidence of something that existed beyond routine. Something that proved there were people who carried their missions so deeply that they became part of their bodies, part of their identity, part of their cellular structure. Ellen stood in the harsh fluorescent light, unmarked except for the intelligence permanently etched across her skin, waiting for someone with enough clearance to understand what they were looking at. She'd tried to leave this world behind, but the trident over her heart had never let her forget. Some things you carry forever. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Commander Jake Harrison entered the security facility with the measured pace of someone who'd been summoned from a classified briefing. His uniform bore the kind of wear that came from operational deployments rather than desk duty, and his eyes carried the perpetual alertness of someone who'd spent years making split-second decisions in hostile territory. He'd received the call 20 minutes earlier while reviewing mission parameters for an upcoming training exercise. "Commander, we have a situation at the main gate. Civilian female, extensive metallic tattoo work, possible operational significance. Name flagged in our database, Ellen Clarkson." The name had stopped him cold. He'd set down his coffee, dismissed his staff, and driven to the security checkpoint without explanation. Ellen Clarkson wasn't supposed to exist anymore. According to official records, she'd been medically discharged from Naval Special Warfare 3 years earlier following a training accident. According to unofficial knowledge, she'd simply vanished from the special operations community after completing something that most people weren't cleared to know about. Chief Martinez met him at the entrance to the screening facility, her expression carefully neutral but her posture suggesting she was dealing with something beyond her experience. "Sir, the subject has been cooperative throughout. No resistance, no demands, no attempts to contact anyone. She's been waiting in secondary room C for approximately 40 minutes. Harrison nodded, studying the preliminary report Martinez handed him. The metal detector readings showed a complex signature pattern, multiple concentrations across the torso, precise spacing, deliberate placement. Not random, not decorative. Operational. Has she said anything about the nature of the markings? Only that they contain mission-critical information that couldn't be stored any other way. Harrison felt the familiar weight of classified knowledge settling across his shoulders. There were operations in the special warfare community that existed in the spaces between official documentation. Missions that required methods so unconventional that they couldn't be submitted through normal channels. Ellen Clarkson had been part of something like that. He approached the door to secondary room C and paused, his hand on the handle. Through the small window, he could see her sitting calmly at the metal table, still wearing only her bra, her arms at her sides. Even from this angle, he could see the intricate markings across her skin, the kind of detail work that would have required multiple sessions with someone who understood both tattoo artistry and military cartography. He entered the room without ceremony. Ellen looked up as he stepped inside, and for the first time since her arrival, her composed facade. The use of her first name wasn't casual, it was acknowledgement. In the special operations world, formality often gave way to something deeper when the situation demanded it. They'd never served together directly, but their paths had crossed in the shadowy overlap between SEAL team operations and naval intelligence special projects. Harrison took the chair across from her, setting his cover on the table between them. His eyes moved across the tattoo work with professional assessment rather than curiosity. He understood what he was looking at. "The Kandahar extraction," he said quietly. Ellen nodded once. "You were briefed?" "Partially. Need-to-know basis?" He gestured toward the markings. This wasn't in any briefing. The tattoo told a story that no official report could capture. Harrison could see the operational grid coordinates spiraling around Ellen's left shoulder, precise location markers for a mountainous region in Afghanistan that had been considered inaccessible by conventional extraction methods. The elevation data traced down her sternum in neat mathematical precision. Terrain features spread across her ribs like a topographical survey rendered in flesh and metallic ink. But it was the smaller details that revealed the true scope of what she'd carried. Hidden among the larger geographical elements were micro-coordinates, backup rally points, alternate route markers, and extraction timelines, an entire mission architecture permanently inscribed on human skin. "How many?" Harrison asked. 17. The number hung in the air between them. 17 service members, cut off behind enemy lines, trapped in terrain that helicopters couldn't reach and ground vehicles couldn't navigate. 17 people whose only hope had been one person willing to memorize their exact locations, infiltrate hostile territory alone, and guide them out through routes so complex that they couldn't be transmitted electronically without risk of interception. Ellen had volunteered to become a living map. "The ink," Harrison said, studying the metallic sheen of certain elements, "that's not standard tattoo work. Ferromagnetic particles suspended in medical-grade pigment. Each coordinate point contains enough metal to be detectable by specialized scanners, but not enough to cause medical complications. The process took 4 months." Harrison leaned back slightly, processing the implications. Ellen hadn't just memorized the mission parameters. She'd had them permanently embedded in her body using experimental techniques that existed somewhere between medical science and operational necessity. The metallic elements would allow the coordinates to be read by specialized equipment, even in complete darkness or under extreme duress. "The trident?" he asked, indicating the surgical marking over her heart. Ellen's hand moved unconsciously to the spot, her fingers tracing the edges of the embedded metal. "Authentication key. Proves the intelligence is legitimate if I'm captured or incapacitated. Can't be replicated without surgical precision and specific metallurgical composition." The room's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting stark shadows across the table. Harrison understood now why Ellen's name had been flagged in the security database. She wasn't just a former SEAL. She was a walking archive of one of the most classified extractions in recent naval special warfare history. The mission was successful, he said. It wasn't a question. All 17 recovered, 0 casualties, mission timeline, 72 hours. Harrison had heard fragments of the story through unofficial channels. A lone operative had somehow navigated treacherous mountain terrain, located multiple scattered personnel, and guided them through a coordinated extraction that conventional wisdom said was impossible. The details had been classified beyond his clearance level, but the results had influenced special operations doctrine for years. Now he understood how it had been possible. Ellen hadn't relied on electronic navigation or paper maps that could be lost or damaged. She'd carried the entire mission architecture in her skin. "You were discharged after," Harrison continued. "Medical reasons." Ellen's tone remained flat, but Harrison caught the slight tightening around her eyes. The tattooing process was experimental. Long-term effects unknown. Navy decided the risk wasn't worth continued active duty. Harrison studied her face, looking for signs of the medical complications that had ended her career. She appeared healthy, alert, fully functional, but he understood the military's position. Ellen represented a proof of concept that the brass wasn't ready to institutionalize. She'd proven that human intelligence could be made literally permanent. But the ethical and medical implications were beyond what the Navy was prepared to support officially. "What brings you to Norfolk?" Harrison asked. Ellen's answer came after a pause, the first hesitation she'd shown since the interrogation began. "Job interview, civilian contractor position, maritime logistics coordination." Harrison nodded, understanding the unspoken context. Ellen was trying to rebuild her life outside the special operations community, applying her unique skill set to civilian maritime work. The irony wasn't lost on him. She possessed some of the most advanced navigation and coordination capabilities in the world, permanently inscribed on her body, and she was interviewing for entry-level contractor work. "The position requires base access," Ellen continued. "I knew the security screening would eventually reveal the markings. I'd hoped to explain them in context rather than," she gestured toward the sterile room around them, "rather than having them discovered during a forced search." "Yes." Harrison made a decision that exceeded his technical authority, but fell well within his operational judgment. He stood, moved to the door, and spoke quietly to Chief Martinez outside. When he returned, his demeanor had shifted from interrogator to advocate. "Ellen, I'm going to make some calls. The contractor position you're interviewing for, they're going to need someone with your capabilities more than they realize. But first, we need to handle the security protocols properly." Ellen's expression remained guarded. "Meaning?" "Meaning your clearance status needs to be updated to reflect your current situation. You're not just a civilian contractor with an unusual tattoo. You're a living repository of classified operational intelligence. That comes with protections as well as restrictions." For the first time since the ordeal began, Ellen showed something approaching relief. The weight of carrying classified information alone, outside the protection of official military status, had been heavier than she'd admitted to herself. Harrison continued, quote, "There are people who need to see this, not for exploitation but for validation. What you did in Kandahar changed how we approach impossible extractions. The doctrine that followed has saved lives." Ellen nodded slowly. "And the contractor position?" "Will be the least interesting part of your file by tomorrow." Outside the security facility, Norfolk Naval Base continued its operations under the Virginia sun, but inside Secondary Room C, a conversation was taking place that would ripple through the special operations community for months to come. Ellen Clarkson, who had tried to disappear into civilian life, was about to discover that some forms of service don't end with discharge papers. The sound of additional footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, more personnel arriving, more clearances being verified, more pieces of a classified puzzle beginning to align. Harrison checked his watch and looked toward the door. "Ellen, I think it's time you met some people who've been waiting 3 years to thank you properly." The first call Commander Harrison made was to Captain Rebecca Stone at Naval Special Warfare Command. Stone had been a lieutenant commander 3 years earlier, when the Kandahar extraction had crossed her desk as an after-action report so heavily redacted that most of the operational details were classified beyond her clearance level. She'd known only that an impossible mission had succeeded and that someone had paid a significant personal cost to make it happen. "Captain Stone?" "Commander Harrison at Norfolk. I need you to pull the Kandahar file. Operation Shepherd's Map." There was silence on the encrypted line. Stone recognized the code name. It was one of those operations that existed in the gray spaces of special warfare, too sensitive for normal documentation but too significant to completely bury. "Harrison, that file is compartmentalized beyond." "The operator is here, at Norfolk. She's been flagged by base security." Another pause. Stone understood the implications immediately. If the primary operative from Shepherd's Map was surfacing in normal military channels, it meant the careful separation between her classified service and her civilian life had been compromised. Status? Cooperative but exposed. She's interviewing for a contractor position and triggered every metal detector on base. Full tattoo reveal to security personnel. Stone closed her eyes. The operational details of Shepherd's Map had been compartmentalized precisely to prevent this scenario. Ellen Clarkson's unique method of carrying mission-critical intelligence had been deemed too sensitive for widespread knowledge, even within the special operations community. How many people have seen the markings? 3 security personnel, myself, and however many are about to when word spreads through the base. Stone made her decision with a quick calculation of someone accustomed to managing classified crises. Lock down all information flow immediately. I'm activating containment protocol. No one else sees her or discusses this until I arrive. Captain, with respect, containment might not be the right approach here. Explain. Harrison chose his words carefully. She's been living as a civilian for 3 years. No support structure, no recognition, no acknowledgement of what she accomplished. She volunteered for experimental modification to save 17 lives, succeeded in an impossible mission, then got medically discharged and forgotten. Containment feels like punishment. Stone considered this. She'd spent her career in special operations, had seen how the community sometimes struggled to balance operational security with taking care of its people. Ellen Clarkson represented an extreme case, someone who had literally embodied her mission in a way that made normal post-service transition impossible. What are you suggesting? Controlled revelation. Bring in the people who matter. Let her story be told to the right audience. Harrison, the security implications are manageable if we control the narrative, but if we try to bury this again, it's going to leak anyway. Base security has already seen everything. The clock is running. Stone understood. Military bases were closed communities, where significant events traveled through informal networks faster than official channels. By evening, half the special operations personnel at Norfolk would know that someone with an unprecedented operational tattoo had been detained at the main gate. I'll be there in 4 hours. Until then, she stays in protective custody. And Harrison? Start making a list of people who need to be briefed. While Harrison coordinated with higher command, Ellen remained in the security facility, now accompanied by a different kind of attention. Chief Martinez had been replaced by Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Rodriguez, a senior enlisted SEAL with enough experience to understand that he was dealing with something beyond normal security protocols. Rodriguez had served long enough to recognize the significance of what he was seeing. The tattoo work across Ellen's torso wasn't just artistic. It was functional military intelligence of a type he'd never encountered, but had heard whispered about in the darker corners of special operations folklore. "Ma'am, I've been asked to ensure your comfort while we wait for additional personnel to arrive," Rodriguez said, offering Ellen a Naval Special Warfare t-shirt. "Figured you might want to cover up." Ellen accepted the shirt gratefully, pulling it over her head. The fabric was soft, worn from multiple washings, and carried the familiar smell of military laundry that brought back memories she'd tried to suppress. "Master Chief, can I ask you something?" "Yes, ma'am." "How many people know about Kandahar?" Rodriguez considered the question carefully. "The operation itself?" "Most of the teams have heard stories. Details are above most people's clearance, but everyone knows something significant happened in that region around 3 years ago. Changed how we approach high-altitude extractions." Ellen nodded. She'd suspected that her mission had influenced subsequent operations, but she'd been discharged before seeing the broader impact of what she'd accomplished. "The method you used," Rodriguez continued, "that's new information for most of us. But it makes sense. Terrain that complex, that many scattered personnel, electronic communications compromised, having the intelligence permanently available would be the only reliable option. It wasn't supposed to be permanent, Ellen said quietly. The ink was designed to fade over 18 months. The metallic particles were supposed to be absorbed by the body eventually. Rodriguez studied her face, but they didn't fade. No. The experimental nature of the process meant there were variables the medical team couldn't predict. The ferromagnetic particles bonded with tissue in ways they hadn't anticipated. 3 years later, the markings are as clear as the day they were applied. The implications settled over Rodriguez like a weight. Ellen hadn't just volunteered for a dangerous mission. She'd volunteered for permanent modification that left her unable to ever fully return to civilian life. Every metal detector, every security screening, every medical examination would reveal her connection to classified operations. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, that's a hell of a sacrifice." Ellen's response was immediate, delivered with the flat certainty of someone who'd had 3 years to consider the cost. 17 people came home. The sacrifice was worth it. Rodriguez had served in special operations for 15 years, had worked with personnel who'd made extraordinary sacrifices for their missions. But Ellen's situation was unique. She'd literally become part of the operational intelligence, permanently altered in service to others. The sound of vehicles arriving outside broke the quiet conversation. Through the small window, Rodriguez could see official sedans pulling into the security facility parking area, the kind of unmarked government vehicles that meant high-level personnel were arriving. "Ma'am, I think your situation is about to get a lot more complicated." Ellen followed his gaze to the window, or a lot simpler. Rodriguez understood her meaning. For 3 years, Ellen had carried the weight of her classified service alone, unable to fully explain her circumstances to potential employers, medical professionals, or anyone else in her civilian life. The exposure at Norfolk, while initially threatening, might finally provide her with official recognition of her situation. The first person through the security facility doors was Commander Harrison, followed by 2 officers Ellen didn't recognize and a civilian in a dark suit who moved with the careful awareness of someone from the intelligence community. Harrison approached the holding room with a different demeanor than before, less investigative, more protective. Behind him, Ellen could see personnel setting up what appeared to be a secure briefing area in the facility's main conference room. "Ellen, there are some people here who need to hear your story, not for investigation but for recognition. Are you prepared for that?" Ellen stood, adjusting the borrowed t-shirt. For the first time since her discharge, she felt like she might be dealing with people who understood not just what she'd done, but what it had cost her. "Commander, I've been prepared for 3 years." The conference room was filling with personnel, a mix of special operations officers, intelligence analysts, and medical professionals. Ellen could see charts being set up, secure communication equipment being tested, and the kind of formal documentation that suggested this gathering would result in official action. Rodriguez opened the door for her, offering a respectful nod. "Ma'am, they're ready for you." Ellen walked toward the conference room, her footsteps echoing in the corridor. Behind her, the simple security screening that had started this process felt like something from another lifetime. Ahead, she could see faces turned toward her with expressions of professional curiosity, respect, and something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Recognition from people who understood exactly what she'd sacrificed and why. The door to the conference room opened, and Ellen stepped inside to face the first official acknowledgement of her service since her discharge. The room went silent as she entered, not with shock or judgment, but with the profound quiet that comes when people realize they're in the presence of someone who represents the very best of what their profession demands. Harrison gestured toward a chair at the head of the table. "Ellen, I think it's time these people heard the real story of Operation Shepherd's Map." The conference room at Norfolk Naval Base had been hastily converted into something resembling a classified briefing theater. Secure communication terminals lined one wall, their screens displaying encrypted feeds from Naval Special Warfare Command and SOCOM headquarters. The lighting had been adjusted to accommodate the projection equipment that would display Ellen's tattoo work in detail for analysis and documentation. Ellen took her seat at the head of the polished conference table, acutely aware that she was still wearing Master Chief Rodriguez's borrowed t-shirt while surrounded by officers in full-dress uniforms. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone in the room. She looked like what she'd been for 3 years, a civilian trying to find her place in a world that didn't understand her background. Captain Rebecca Stone entered the room with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to managing crises that existed in the classified spaces between official policy and operational necessity. She was younger than Ellen had expected, probably in her early 40s, with the kind of bearing that suggested she'd earned her position through operational expertise rather than administrative advancement. "Ms. Clarkson," Stone said, taking the seat directly across from Ellen, "I want to start by saying that what happened to you after Kandahar was unacceptable. You should never have been discharged and forgotten. This briefing is the beginning of correcting that oversight." Ellen nodded once, her expression carefully controlled. She'd spent 3 years believing that her service had been classified to the point of irrelevance, that the 17 lives she'd helped save were footnotes in someone else's operational report. Stone gestured toward the other personnel in the room. "I'd like to introduce the team that's going to help us understand the full scope of what you accomplished and how we can properly recognize it." The introductions revealed the gravity of what Ellen had inadvertently triggered by walking through Norfolk's security checkpoint. Dr. Sarah Chen from Naval Medical Research Command was there to assess the long-term implications of the experimental tattooing process. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb from SOCOM represented the Joint Special Operations Community's interest in Ellen's unique intelligence-carrying capability. Agent Patricia Davis from Naval Criminal Investigative Service was present to ensure that any security protocols established around Ellen's situation would protect both her and the classified information she carried. But it was the last introduction that made Ellen sit up straighter in her chair. "And this is Gunnery Sergeant Michael Torres, currently assigned to SEAL Team 6. Gunny Torres was one of the personnel extracted during Operation Shepherd's Map." Torres was a compact, weathered man in his mid-30s, with the kind of scars that came from actual combat rather than training accidents. He studied Ellen with an intensity that made her uncomfortable, not because it was hostile, but because it carried the weight of someone who owed a debt he'd never been able to acknowledge. "Ma'am," Torres said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been waiting 3 years to meet you." Ellen felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. For the first time since her discharge, she was sitting across from someone who had been there, who understood not just what she'd done, but what it had meant to the people she'd saved. Captain Stone activated the room's projection system and the lights dimmed slightly. "Ellen, we need to document your tattoo work officially. The images will be classified at the highest levels, but we need a complete record for both medical monitoring and operational analysis." Ellen hesitated for only a moment before removing the borrowed t-shirt. The room's atmosphere shifted as the full scope of her body modification became visible under the adjusted lighting. The metallic elements in the tattoo work caught the projection system's illumination, creating a 3-dimensional map that seemed to float just above her skin. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her medical training overriding any social awkwardness about the situation. "Ellen, the precision of this work is extraordinary. Each coordinate appears to be accurate to within meters. How was this level of detail achieved?" "Surgical tattooing combined with GPS-verified mapping," Ellen replied. "Each session lasted 8 hours. The process took 4 months to complete, with verification procedures between each session to ensure accuracy." Lieutenant Colonel Webb took notes on a secure tablet, his expression revealing his professional fascination with the methodology. The ferromagnetic particles, were they detectable by enemy scanning equipment? That was the primary concern during development. The particle concentration was calibrated to be readable by our equipment, but below the threshold of standard enemy detection systems. Field testing confirmed the stealth characteristics. Torres spoke up, his voice quiet but carrying across the room. "Ma'am, I need to tell you something about that mission." Ellen looked at him directly for the first time since the introductions. "We knew you were coming," Torres continued. "Command had told us that someone was attempting extraction, but they couldn't give us details about the method or timeline. We'd been pinned down for 6 days, running low on everything. Some of the guys had started talking about surrendering rather than waiting for help that might never come." The room had gone completely silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. "Then you appeared at our position like you'd been born knowing exactly where we were. No radio contact, no preliminary scouting, no uncertainty about terrain or enemy placement. You moved through that mountain complex like you had a map printed in your head." Ellen's voice was steady when she responded. "I did have a map printed in my head, That was the point. Torres nodded, understanding flooding his expression. You guided us through terrain that we'd been trying to navigate for a week. Showed us routes that weren't on any of the charts we carried. Led us to rally points that shouldn't have existed but were perfectly positioned for tactical advantage. Captain Stone interrupted gently. Gunny Torres, can you describe the extraction route for the record? Torres closed his eyes, accessing memories that were clearly still vivid after 3 years. 17 waypoints across 47 kilometers of hostile mountain terrain. Each transition point was positioned to minimize exposure to enemy observation while maintaining movement toward the extraction zone. The route avoided every known enemy position and included alternate pathways for contingencies we hadn't even considered. Dr. Chen looked up from her notes. Ellen, you memorized 47 kilometers of terrain down to individual waypoints? The tattoo contains primary routes, alternate routes, emergency rally points, cache locations, and extraction coordinates for multiple scenarios. The mission planners couldn't predict exact enemy positions or weather conditions, so the intelligence had to be comprehensive enough to handle variations. Agent Davis spoke for the first time since the briefing began. The security implications of this are extraordinary. You're carrying operational intelligence that could compromise future missions if it fell into enemy hands. Ellen's response was immediate and firm, which is why I've avoided military installations and overseas travel since my discharge. I understood the security burden I was carrying. Lieutenant Colonel Webb leaned back in his chair, processing the strategic implications. Ellen, you realize that what you're describing represents a completely new paradigm for special operations intelligence. The ability to carry complex operational data in a way that can't be compromised by electronic warfare or physical document capture. That was the hypothesis the mission was designed to test. And the results? Torres answered before Ellen could respond. 17 personnel extracted with 0 casualties from terrain that conventional wisdom said was impassable. Mission completed in 72 hours instead of the projected 2-week timeline. Captain Stone made notes on her secure tablet, then looked up at Ellen. The question now is, what happens next? You're carrying classified operational intelligence from a successful mission that's influenced special operations doctrine for 3 years. You can't simply return to civilian contractor work and pretend this doesn't exist. Ellen had been dreading this moment, the point where her attempt to build a normal civilian life would be officially acknowledged as impossible. What are my options? Stone's expression softened slightly. That's what we're here to determine. But I can tell you that abandoning you to figure this out alone isn't one of them. Dr. Chen cleared her throat. From a medical standpoint, Ellen needs ongoing monitoring. The ferromagnetic particles in her system are stable now, but long-term effects of this type of body modification are still unknown. She should be under regular medical supervision by people who understand her unique situation. Agent Davis nodded in agreement. And from a security standpoint, she needs protection protocols. The intelligence she's carrying makes her a high-value target if hostile forces ever identify her. Torres spoke up again, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned the right to have opinions about Ellen's situation. Ma'am, with respect, I think you need to understand something. What you didn't just save 17 lives. It proves something that's changed how we approach impossible missions. Ellen looked at him questioningly. You proved that when everything else fails, when technology gets compromised, when communication breaks down, when conventional methods reach their limits, human commitment can still find a way. That's not just operational success, that's inspiration. The room fell quiet again as the weight of Torres's words settled over the assembled personnel. Ellen had spent 3 years thinking of herself as a medical discharge, a failed experiment, someone who'd volunteered for modification that had ultimately ended her career. Captain Stone broke the silence. Ellen, I think it's time you understood that you're not a problem to be managed. You're a capability to be honored. Outside the conference room, Norfolk Naval Base continued its daily operations under the Virginia afternoon sun, but inside, surrounded by personnel who finally understood the full scope of her sacrifice, Ellen Clarkson was discovering that some forms of service create bonds that transcend official recognition or career limitations. The secure video conference that Captain Stone initiated at 1,600 hours connected Norfolk Naval Base to command centers across 3 time zones. On the main screen, Ellen could see the faces of senior officers from Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, SOCOM headquarters at MacDill Air Force Base, and Pentagon officials whose titles were obscured by security protocols. Each location represented a different aspect of the special operations community that had been shaped by her mission without knowing her name. Admiral Patricia Kemp spoke first from her office at Naval Special Warfare Command. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years in special operations, including multiple deployments that had given her a deep understanding of what unconventional missions demanded from their operators. Ms. Clarkson, I want to begin by acknowledging that the Navy failed you after Kandahar. Your service should have been recognized, not buried. Your needs should have been addressed, not ignored. We're here to correct that failure. Ellen listened carefully, aware that she was participating in the kind of high-level military discussion that most personnel never experienced. The video feeds showed secure briefing rooms filled with senior staff, all focused on a conversation about her unique situation. Admiral, Ellen replied, I understood the security requirements when I volunteered for the modification. I knew the mission would be classified. Understanding classification requirements doesn't excuse abandoning personnel who make extraordinary sacrifices, Admiral Kemp responded firmly. What you did went beyond normal operational expectations. The Navy should have maintained support structures for your transition back to civilian life. On a secondary screen, Colonel James Morrison from SOCOM leaned forward. Ms. Clarkson, we need to discuss the operational impact of your mission. The extraction methodology you demonstrated has been incorporated into training programs across multiple special operations units. You literally changed how we approach high-risk personnel recovery. Ellen felt a mixture of pride and discomfort. She'd hoped her mission had been successful, but she hadn't realized it had influenced broader military doctrine. Sir, can you elaborate on the training applications? Colonel Morrison activated a presentation that appeared on the conference room's main display. The Shepherd Protocol is now standard curriculum in advanced special operations schools. It covers human-carried intelligence systems, terrain-based navigation without electronic support, and multi-point extraction coordination using embedded reference systems. Ellen stared at the presentation slides, which showed sanitized versions of the techniques she'd used during the Kandahar extraction. Her personal sacrifice had been transformed into institutional knowledge that was saving lives across the special operations community. Dr. Chen, who had been quietly reviewing Ellen's medical files, looked up from her secure tablet. Ellen, I need to discuss the long-term health implications of your situation. The ferromagnetic particles in your system have remained stable for 3 years, but we don't have data on what happens beyond that timeline. Admiral Kemp nodded toward Dr. Chen. Doctor, what kind of medical monitoring does Ms. Clarkson require? Quarterly imaging to track particle distribution, annual blood work to monitor for any systemic effects, and immediate access to specialized medical care if complications arise. The experimental nature of her modification means she needs ongoing support from medical professionals who understand her unique physiology. Ellen had been managing her medical needs through civilian healthcare providers who didn't understand the nature of her modifications. The prospect of proper medical support was something she hadn't allowed herself to hope for. Agent Davis activated her secure communication system, displaying legal documents on a side screen. We also need to address Ms. Clarkson's legal status. She's currently carrying classified operational intelligence as a civilian, which creates significant legal and security complications. Colonel Morrison leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. What are the options for regularizing her status? Several possibilities, Agent Davis replied. Civilian contractor status with appropriate security clearances, reserve commission with special duties designation, or creation of a new personnel category specifically for individuals carrying permanent operational intelligence. Ellen realized that her simple attempt to interview for a logistics coordination job had inadvertently triggered a comprehensive review of how the military handles personnel who make irreversible sacrifices for classified missions. Gunnery Sergeant Torres, who had remained quiet during the high-level discussions, cleared his throat. Ma'am, if I may speak to the operational community impact. Admiral Kemp nodded toward him. Go ahead, Gunny. Torres stood, his posture shifting to the formal bearing of someone addressing senior command. Ma'am, I've spent 3 years in special operations training facilities, where instructors reference the Kandahar extraction as an example of impossible missions becoming possible through operator innovation. But they couldn't give details about how it was accomplished. He paused, looking directly at Ellen through the video connection. Now that I know the method, that someone volunteered for permanent body modification to carry mission-critical intelligence, it changes everything. It's not just a tactical success story anymore. It's proof that special operations personnel will literally transform themselves to complete the mission and save their teammates. Torres's words carried across the video conference with the weight of personal testimony. Ellen could see officers in multiple locations nodding in recognition of the deeper implications. Admiral Kemp spoke carefully. "Gunny Torres, you're suggesting that Ms. Clarkson's mission has significance beyond the immediate operational success?" "Yes, ma'am. It's become a standard of commitment that influences how operators think about mission dedication. But without knowing the personal cost she paid, the story was incomplete." Colonel Morrison activated another presentation slide. This brings up an important question about recognition. Ms. Clarkson's service has influenced Special Operations doctrine for 3 years, but she's received no official acknowledgement. That needs to change. Ellen found herself at the center of a discussion about military recognition that she'd never expected. The officers on the video conference were debating awards, commendations, and official acknowledgments that would formally recognize her contribution to Special Operations capabilities. Dr. Chen interrupted the recognition discussion with a medical concern. "Before we finalize any official status changes, I need to complete a comprehensive medical evaluation. Ellen's unique physiology may have requirements that influence what roles she can safely assume." Agent Davis nodded in agreement. "And I need to establish security protocols. If Ms. Clarkson returns to any official military status, she'll need protection measures appropriate for someone carrying her level of classified intelligence." Ellen felt overwhelmed by the complexity of discussions swirling around her situation. What had started as a security checkpoint incident was becoming a multi-agency effort to address gaps in how the military supports personnel who make irreversible sacrifices. Captain Stone, who had been coordinating the various discussions, spoke directly to Ellen. "I know this is a lot to process. You came here for a job interview and found yourself in the middle of a policy review. But I want you to understand that this conversation is happening because people finally realize you deserve support, not additional burdens." Ellen looked around the conference room, then at the video screens showing senior officers across multiple commands. "Captain, what happens if I just want to return to civilian life? What if I don't want official status or recognition?" The question created silence across all the video connections. Ellen could see officers exchanging glances, considering implications they hadn't fully addressed. Admiral Kemp spoke first. "Ms. Clarkson, that's ultimately your choice. But I need to be direct about the practical realities. You're carrying classified operational intelligence that makes normal civilian life complicated. You need medical support that civilian healthcare can't provide. And frankly, the special operations community owes you support that you haven't received." Colonel Morrison added, "Ellen, even if you choose civilian status, we need to establish support structures. Medical care, security protocols, legal protections, these aren't optional given your unique situation." Torres spoke up again, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. "Ma'am, I understand wanting a normal life, but what you did changed how we save people. That's not something you can just walk away from. And it's not something we should let you carry alone." Ellen realized that her 3 years of trying to disappear into civilian anonymity had been an illusion. The ferromagnetic particles in her skin, the classified intelligence permanently inscribed on her body, the 17 lives she'd helped save, none of it could be undone or ignored. Captain Stone made a decision that reflected the consensus emerging from the multi-agency discussion. "Ellen, I'm going to make a recommendation. Take 30 days to consider your options. During that time, you'll have access to proper medical care, security support, and legal counsel. No commitments, no pressure, just time to understand what's being offered." Ellen looked at the faces on the video screens, then at the personnel in the conference room. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't carrying the weight of her unique situation alone. "Captain," she said, "I accept." 3 days after the video conference, Ellen found herself in quarters at Norfolk Naval Base that hadn't been occupied by classified personnel in over a decade. The room was spartanly furnished but comfortable, with secure communication equipment and direct access to medical facilities. More importantly, it offered her something she hadn't experienced since her discharge, a sense of belonging in a community that understood her background. The knock on her door came at 08:00 sharp. Ellen opened it to find a young petty officer holding a sealed envelope with her name written in careful block letters. "Ma'am, this came through secure channels from Naval Special Warfare Command. I was instructed to deliver it personally." Ellen accepted the envelope, noting the weight of official documents inside. The petty officer saluted crisply and departed, leaving Ellen alone with correspondence that would shape her immediate future. The first document was a temporary security clearance restoration, signed by Admiral Kemp personally. Ellen's civilian status had been officially suspended pending resolution of her long-term assignment, and her access to classified facilities and personnel had been restored at the level appropriate for someone carrying her unique intelligence burden. The second document made her pause. It was a letter from Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, currently assigned to SEAL Team 2, requesting a meeting to discuss operational applications of embedded navigation systems. Ellen recognized the careful language. Martinez was asking to learn about the tattooing methodology for potential future applications. Ellen sat on the edge of her narrow bed, holding correspondence that proved her situation was creating waves throughout the special operations community. She'd tried to disappear into civilian life, but her reemergence had apparently triggered interest from personnel, considering similar modifications for their own missions. The secure phone in her room rang with the distinctive tone that indicated an encrypted call from outside the base. "Ellen, this is Master Chief Rodriguez. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Ellen smiled at the familiar voice. Rodriguez had checked on her daily since the briefing, making sure she understood the base procedures and had everything she needed. "Not at all, Master Chief. What can I do for you?" "Actually, I'm calling because there's someone here who'd like to meet you. Another one of the Kandahar personnel. He's been stationed at Little Creek, heard through unofficial channels that you were at Norfolk." Ellen felt her chest tighten. Meeting Torres had been emotionally difficult enough. The prospect of facing another person whose life she'd helped save brought back memories she'd spent 3 years trying to manage. "Master Chief, I'm not sure I'm ready for." "Ma'am, I understand, but this one's different. Petty Officer First Class David Kim. He's been carrying something for 3 years that I think you need to see." An hour later, Ellen found herself in the base's secure conference facility again, but this time the setting was informal. Rodriguez had arranged chairs around a small table, with coffee and the kind of unofficial atmosphere that encouraged honest conversation rather than formal briefings. Petty Officer Kim was younger than Torres, probably in his late 20s, with the lean build of someone who'd spent years in special operations training, but his eyes carried the same weight that Ellen had seen in Torres, the look of someone who'd faced situations that most people couldn't imagine. "Ma'am," Kim said as Ellen entered the room, "I need to show you something." He rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a tattoo that made Ellen catch her breath. It was simple compared to her complex body modification, just a set of coordinates rendered in precise military format, followed by a date and the number 17. "Those are the coordinates where you found my team," Kim explained. "The date is when we were extracted. The 17 represents everyone who came home." Ellen stared at the tattoo, understanding immediately what it meant. Kim had chosen to permanently mark himself with a reminder of the mission that had saved his life. "How many others?" Ellen asked quietly. Rodriguez answered, "All of them. Every member of the extraction has some kind of permanent commemoration. Some got tattoos, some commissioned memorial pieces. One guy had coordinates engraved inside his wedding ring. They've been carrying reminders of that mission for 3 years." Ellen felt overwhelmed by the realization that her sacrifice had inspired others to create their own permanent reminders of what had happened in the mountains of Afghanistan. Kim leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Ma'am, we tried to find you after we got back. Command told us the mission was classified, that we weren't authorized to know details about the extraction methodology or personnel involved, but we knew someone had risked everything to get us out." "You didn't need to commemorate." "Yes, we did," Kim interrupted gently. "What you did changed how we think about commitment to the mission and to each other. We needed to carry that with us." Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and activated a secure photo application. "Ellen, I want to show you something else." These came through unofficial channels over the past 3 years. The photos showed special operations personnel from various units, all displaying tattoos, engravings, or other permanent modifications that reference the Kandahar extraction. Some showed coordinates, others displayed terrain features, and several incorporated the number 17 in various artistic formats. Master Chief, how many people know about the mission details? Officially? Very few. Unofficially. The story has spread through the community in the way that significant events do. People know that an impossible extraction succeeded, that 17 personnel were recovered from terrain that should have been impassable, and that someone used methods that changed how we approach similar missions. Ellen scrolled through the photos, each one representing a person whose life had been influenced by her decision to undergo experimental body modification. The scope of impact was far broader than she'd imagined during her isolated civilian years. Kim spoke up again. "Ma'am, there's something else. The training programs that reference your mission, they've produced operators who've successfully completed extractions that might not have been possible before. Your methodology didn't just save 17 people in Afghanistan, it's been saving lives in subsequent operations." Rodriguez nodded in confirmation. The Shepherd Protocol has been applied in Syria, Somalia, and the Philippines. Each time, operators used embedded intelligence techniques to navigate complex terrain and coordinate multi-point extractions. The success rate for these operations has been significantly higher than conventional approaches. Ellen felt the weight of unintended consequences settling around her. Her personal sacrifice had become institutional knowledge that was creating operational advantages across the special operations community. "How many subsequent extractions?" Ellen asked. Rodriguez consulted his tablet. 43 successful personnel recoveries using modified Shepherd Protocol methodology. Total personnel recovered 112. The numbers hit Ellen like physical force. Her decision to undergo experimental tattooing had directly influenced the successful recovery of over 100 additional personnel across multiple theaters of operation. Kim pulled out his own secure device, displaying a message thread that Ellen could see contained dozens of participants. "Ma'am, this is an unofficial communication network for personnel who've been involved in Shepherd Protocol operations. Everyone from original Kandahar extraction survivors to operators who've used the methodology in recent missions." Ellen could see message fragments discussing operational techniques, medical considerations, and ongoing refinements to the embedded intelligence approach. Her unique modification had spawned a community of practice that was advancing special operations capabilities. "They want to meet you," Kim continued, "not for publicity or recognition, but to understand the full context of what they've been building on." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, watching Ellen process the information. "Ellen, I think you need to understand that your attempt to disappear into civilian life was never going to work long-term. What you did created ripples that are still expanding through the special operations community." Ellen looked at the photos of commemorative tattoos, the statistics on subsequent successful extractions, and the communication network that had grown around her methodology. Her 3 years of isolation had been spent unaware that her sacrifice was continuing to save lives through institutional applications she'd never anticipated. "Master Chief, what exactly are these people hoping to accomplish by meeting me?" "Understanding," Rodriguez replied simply. "They've been using techniques derived from your sacrifice, without knowing the personal cost you paid. They want to ensure that future applications are developed responsibly, with full awareness of what they're asking people to undertake." Kim nodded earnestly. "Ma'am, some of the newer operators have been volunteering for experimental modifications without understanding the long-term implications. They see the operational advantages but don't realize what permanent body modification means for civilian reintegration." Ellen realized that her re-emergence into military circles had created an opportunity to influence how her methodology would be applied in future operations. She could help ensure that other operators understood both the capabilities and the costs of embedded intelligence systems. Rodriguez stood, moving to the secure communication terminal. "Ellen, there's a video conference scheduled for tomorrow, with representatives from the unofficial Shepherd Protocol network. They're not asking for operational details or classified information. They want to understand the human factors that should influence future applications." Ellen looked around the conference room, thinking about the 17 people she'd originally saved, the 100-plus personnel recovered through subsequent applications of her methodology, and the operators who might volunteer for similar modifications in the future. "Master Chief," she said, "set up the conference. It's time these people understood what they're really asking for." The video conference room at Norfolk had been configured for maximum security and minimum formality. Ellen sat at a small table facing a wall of monitors, each screen showing a different location where special operations personnel had gathered to participate in what was being called an informal consultation on embedded intelligence methodology. The participants weren't identified by name or unit. Operational security demanded anonymity, but their faces carried the unmistakable bearing of people who'd spent years in the most demanding corners of military service. Master Chief Rodriguez operated the secure communication systems from a control station, ensuring that the conversation would remain within appropriate security boundaries while allowing for the kind of honest discussion that Ellen's unique situation demanded. The first voice came from a screen showing someone in desert camouflage, location obscured but accent suggesting southwestern United States training facilities. "Ma'am, I'm currently preparing for a mission that involves terrain similar to what you navigated in Kandahar. My team has been studying the Shepherd Protocol for 6 months, but we've been working from sanitized training materials. We need to understand the reality of what embedded intelligence systems require." Ellen studied the face on the screen, young, probably mid-20s, with the intensity of someone preparing for a mission that would test every aspect of his training. "What specific questions do you have about the methodology?" "The pain tolerance requirements, ma'am. The training materials discuss the technical aspects of ferromagnetic tattooing, but they don't address the psychological preparation needed for permanent body modification under field conditions." Ellen paused, remembering her own experience with the experimental tattooing process. The medical team had warned her that the procedure would be significantly more uncomfortable than standard tattoo work due to the metallic particle suspension and the precision required for operational accuracy. "The process took 4 months because it couldn't be rushed," Ellen explained. "Each session involved 8 hours of precise needlework with frequent breaks for GPS verification of coordinate accuracy. The metallic particles created additional tissue trauma that required extended healing periods between sessions." Another voice joined from a different screen, this one showing someone in Naval Special Operations gear. "Ma'am, what about the long-term physical effects?" "The medical briefings suggest potential complications, but they're not specific about what operators should expect." Dr. Chen, who had joined the conference from her medical research facility, addressed this question directly. "The ferromagnetic particles remain permanently embedded in tissue. Long-term effects include heightened sensitivity to certain types of electromagnetic fields, potential complications with medical imaging procedures, and ongoing monitoring requirements for particle migration." Ellen added her personal perspective. "I can feel changes in electromagnetic environments, metal detectors, MRI machines, even some electronic devices. It's not painful, but it's a constant reminder that your body has been modified in ways that affect how you interact with technology." A third participant, whose screen showed what appeared to be an overseas training facility, asked the question Ellen had been expecting. "Ma'am, do you regret the modification?" Ellen considered her answer carefully. This was the question that every operator considering similar modification would ultimately face, whether the operational advantages justified the personal costs. "I regret that it became permanent when it was designed to be temporary. I regret that it ended my active duty career. I regret 3 years of trying to hide from something that should have been supported rather than classified into invisibility." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "But I don't regret saving 17 lives. And I don't regret proving that human commitment can overcome technological limitations when the mission demands it." The conference room fell silent as her words carried across the secure network to special operations personnel in multiple time zones. Rodriguez spoke up from his control station. "Ellen, one of the participants has a question that might be sensitive. Are you comfortable addressing the psychological aspects of carrying permanent operational intelligence?" Ellen nodded, understanding that this conversation was moving into territory that training manuals couldn't adequately cover. The voice came from a screen showing someone in what appeared to be a medical facility. "Ma'am, how do you handle the mental burden of carrying classified information permanently inscribed on your body, the psychological weight of being a walking operational archive?" This was the question Ellen had been grappling with for 3 years, without adequate support or understanding from civilian mental health professionals. "It's isolating," she said honestly. "You can't discuss the details with anyone who lacks clearance, but the physical reminder is always there. Every shower, every medical examination, every relationship becomes complicated by the fact that you're carrying state secrets in your skin." Dr. Chen activated a secondary screen displaying psychological assessment protocols. We've developed support structures for personnel with embedded intelligence systems based on Ellen's experience. The key factors include regular psychological evaluation, peer support from others with similar modifications, an ongoing mission context that maintains the sense of purpose that justified the original sacrifice. Ellen felt surprised by the comprehensive nature of the support systems that had been developed based on her situation. Dr. Chen, how many others have undergone similar modifications? 7 operators across various special operations units. All volunteers, all for missions with specific requirements that conventional intelligence methods couldn't meet. Each case has been managed with full awareness of the long-term implications you experienced. The realization that she'd become the template for supporting others with experimental modifications was both gratifying and overwhelming. Ellen's isolated struggle had become institutional knowledge that was protecting subsequent volunteers from the abandonment she'd experienced. A new voice joined the conference, this one carrying senior authority. Ms. Clarkson, this is Colonel Martinez from Special Operations Command Medical Division. I need to address something that goes beyond individual mission applications. Ellen straightened in her chair, recognizing the shift to a more formal discussion. Your case has highlighted gaps in how we support personnel who undergo experimental modifications for operational purposes. We're implementing new protocols to ensure that future volunteers receive comprehensive long-term care regardless of their duty status. Colonel Martinez activated a presentation showing policy documents that Ellen could see were being developed in direct response to her situation. The Clarkson protocols establish medical monitoring requirements, security support structures, career transition assistance, and legal protections for personnel carrying permanent operational intelligence. These protocols are being implemented across all special operations commands. Ellen stared at the presentation, seeing her name attached to military policy for the first time since her discharge. Her personal ordeal was being transformed into institutional protections for others. Rodriguez caught her attention from the control station. Ellen, there's one more participant in this conference who's been waiting to speak with you. A new screen activated, showing someone in civilian clothes sitting in what appeared to be a private office. The person's face was obscured by security protocols, but their voice carried unmistakable authority. Ms. Clarkson, I represent personnel who've been monitoring your situation from the intelligence community perspective. Your reemergence has created opportunities that extend beyond military applications. Ellen felt a chill of uncertainty. What kind of opportunities? Consultation on embedded intelligence systems for civilian intelligence operations, teaching methodology for law enforcement applications, research collaboration on next-generation human-carried information systems. The implications were staggering. Ellen's experimental modification was being considered for applications across the broader intelligence and law enforcement communities. Sir, I need to be clear about something, Ellen said firmly. I underwent experimental modification to save 17 specific people in one specific mission. I'm not interested in becoming a template for widespread human experimentation. The civilian participant's response was immediate and respectful. Understood completely. We're not seeking to exploit your situation, but to learn from it. Your experience provides crucial data about the human factors involved in permanent intelligence modification. Ellen looked around the conference room, then at the multiple screens showing personnel whose careers and missions had been influenced by her sacrifice. Her simple attempt to transition to civilian life had uncovered a network of people who'd been building on her work without her knowledge or input. Rodriguez ended the conference with careful protocol, ensuring that all secure connections were properly terminated. As the screens went dark, Ellen found herself alone in the room with the weight of everything she'd learned about her ongoing impact on the special operations community. Master Chief, she said as Rodriguez finished his equipment checks, I think I understand now why going back to civilian life isn't really an option. Rodriguez nodded, understanding the conclusion she'd reached. Ellen, you've become something that the community can't function without. But that doesn't mean you have to carry the burden alone anymore. Ellen stood, looking at the now dark monitors that had connected her to a network of people whose lives and missions had been shaped by her sacrifice. For the first time since her discharge, she felt like she was part of something larger than her individual struggle to find a place in the world. Master Chief, I think it's time I stopped trying to escape from what I am and started figuring out how to use it properly. 6 weeks after walking through Norfolk Naval Base's security checkpoint as a nervous job applicant, Ellen Clarkson stood before a joint assembly of special operations personnel that represented every branch of military service. The gathering wasn't ceremonial, it was functional, designed to formally establish her role as the primary consultant for embedded intelligence systems across the special warfare community. The auditorium at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado held 300 personnel, but it felt intimate rather than overwhelming. These weren't distant bureaucrats or curious observers. They were operators, medical specialists, intelligence analysts, and support personnel who understood exactly what Ellen represented and why her experience mattered to their own missions. Admiral Kemp approached the podium with the measured pace of someone delivering remarks that would influence special operations policy for decades to come. Today marks the official recognition of a capability that has been protecting American personnel for 3 years without proper acknowledgement. Ellen Clarkson volunteered for experimental modification that saved 17 lives and established methodologies that have since recovered over 100 additional personnel from hostile territory. Ellen sat in the front row, wearing dress blues that had been specially tailored to accommodate her unique physiology. The uniform felt simultaneously foreign and familiar. She hadn't worn military dress in 3 years, but the weight of official recognition made it feel appropriate. Ms. Clarkson will be assuming the newly created position of Senior Consultant for Embedded Intelligence Systems, with the civilian equivalent rank of GS-14 and security clearances appropriate for someone carrying her level of operational knowledge. The position represented something unprecedented in military structure, official recognition for someone whose service existed in the spaces between traditional career paths. Ellen would have the authority to guide policy, influence training, and ensure that future applications of embedded intelligence were developed with full awareness of their human costs. Admiral Kemp continued, "The Clarkson protocols, which establish comprehensive support systems for personnel undergoing experimental modifications, are being implemented across all Special Operations Commands effective immediately." Ellen felt the weight of official vindication settling around her. The policies bearing her name would ensure that future volunteers received the medical support, career protection, and psychological assistance that she'd been denied. From her seat, Ellen could see faces in the audience that she recognized from the video conferences and informal meetings of the past 6 weeks. Torres sat 3 rows back, wearing the dress uniform appropriate for someone attending a ceremony that honored the person who'd saved his life. Kim was near the center, surrounded by other Kandahar extraction survivors who'd traveled from various duty stations to attend Ellen's formal recognition. But it was the group in the back of the auditorium that meant the most to Ellen. 7 personnel, male and female, from different service branches, all carrying their own experimental modifications from missions that had followed the Shepard Protocol methodology. They weren't there as curiosities or test subjects. They were there as colleagues who understood the unique challenges of permanent intelligence embedding. Dr. Chen approached the podium to deliver medical findings that would influence policy across the special operations medical community. 3 years of monitoring Ms. Clarkson's modification have provided crucial data about the long-term viability of embedded intelligence systems. The ferromagnetic particle suspension has remained stable, with no adverse health effects detected. More importantly, the psychological support structures we've developed have proven effective in maintaining operator wellness during extended periods of carrying classified intelligence. Ellen appreciated the clinical validation of her situation, but she also understood that Dr. Chen's research had broader implications. Future operators considering similar modifications would have comprehensive medical data to guide their decisions. Captain Stone took the podium next, representing the operational perspective on Ellen's contributions. The Shepard Protocol has become foundational training in special operations schools across all service branches. But more than technique, it represents proof that human innovation can overcome technological limitations when mission success demands it. Stone gestured toward Ellen, who remained seated but felt the attention of the entire auditorium focused on her. Ms. Clarkson didn't just complete an impossible mission. She demonstrated that the most advanced intelligence system available to special operations is still the human operator willing to make whatever sacrifice the mission requires. The applause that followed was measured and respectful, military recognition rather than civilian celebration. Ellen felt the acknowledgement in a way that made 3 years of isolation seem like preparation for this moment. Admiral Kemp returned to the podium for the final remarks. Ellen Clarkson will be establishing the Embedded Intelligence Consultation Office at this facility. Her responsibilities will include evaluating proposed applications of embedded intelligence systems, providing guidance for personnel considering experimental modifications, and ensuring that the human factors learned from her experience inform all future policy. Ellen stood as Admiral Kemp gestured toward her, feeling the weight of official responsibility settling across her shoulders. It was heavier than her original mission assignment, but also more sustainable. She would no longer carry her burden alone. "Ms. Clarkson, the podium is yours." Ellen approached the microphone with steady steps, looking out at an audience that represented the best of American special operations. These were people who understood sacrifice, who accepted risk, who made impossible missions succeed through determination and innovation. 3 years ago, I volunteered for experimental body modification because 17 American personnel needed extraction from terrain that conventional methods couldn't reach. I thought I was making a one-time sacrifice for a specific mission. She paused, looking at the faces in the auditorium. I learned 6 weeks ago that my sacrifice became methodology that has saved over 100 additional lives. I learned that my experience influenced training that has made impossible missions routine. I learned that my isolation was unnecessary, and my struggle to find civilian integration was based on a misunderstanding of my ongoing value to this community. Ellen could see Torres nodding in the audience, along with Kim and the other Kandahar survivors. Today, I'm accepting responsibility not just for my own modification, but for ensuring that future applications of embedded intelligence are developed with full understanding of their implications. No operator should undergo experimental modification without comprehensive support. No one should carry classified intelligence alone. No one should be abandoned after making irreversible sacrifices for mission success. The applause was immediate and sustained. Ellen felt the recognition not as personal validation but as institutional commitment to supporting others who might follow similar paths. As the ceremony concluded, Ellen found herself surrounded by personnel who wanted to discuss operational applications, share their own experiences with experimental modifications, or simply express appreciation for her willingness to guide future developments in embedded intelligence. Torres approached first, carrying a small wooden box that he handed to Ellen with formal ceremony. "Ma'am, this contains soil from the 17 extraction points in Kandahar. Each member of the extraction team contributed a sample from the location where you found them. We wanted you to have something physical to commemorate what you made possible." Ellen accepted the box with hands that trembled slightly. Inside, she could see small glass vials, each labeled with coordinates that matched the tattoo work on her torso. Kim joined them, along with 3 other Kandahar survivors Ellen hadn't met before. "Ma'am, we also wanted to give you this." He handed her a photograph showing all 17 extraction survivors, taken at a reunion they'd organized without her knowledge. On the back, each person had signed their name, along with the coordinates where Ellen had found them. "We meet every year on the anniversary of the extraction," Kim explained. "This year, we'd like you to join us." Ellen looked at the photograph, seeing faces that represented the human cost and human reward of her experimental sacrifice. For 3 years, she'd carried the memory of those 17 people as an abstract responsibility. Now they were real again, part of a community that had been waiting to welcome her back. Master Chief Rodriguez approached with official documents that would formalize Ellen's new position and security status. "Ellen, your office is being prepared on the 3rd floor. Full security clearance, medical support, and a staff of specialists who understand embedded intelligence applications. You'll be briefing congressional oversight committees next month about the policy implications of human-carried intelligence systems." Ellen signed the documents, officially accepting a role that would place her at the center of special operations innovation while ensuring that her unique experience would protect others from the isolation she'd endured. As the auditorium emptied, Ellen remained behind, looking at the soil samples from Kandahar and the photograph of people whose lives had been shaped by her decision to transform her body into a navigation system. Admiral Kemp approached for a private word. "Ellen, I want you to understand that what happened here represents more than policy correction or career assignment. You've proven that the most sophisticated technology available to special operations is still the human being willing to adapt, sacrifice, and persist until the mission succeeds." Ellen looked around the auditorium where her formal recognition had taken place, then at the documents establishing her new role in guiding embedded intelligence applications. Admiral, I understand now that my discharge 3 years ago wasn't the end of my service. It was preparation for a different kind of contribution. Admiral Kemp nodded. The kind that ensures other operators receive the support you deserved from the beginning. Ellen walked out of the auditorium carrying soil from 17 extraction points, a photograph of 17 rescued personnel, and the official recognition that her experimental sacrifice had become institutional knowledge, protecting American lives across multiple theaters of operation. The security checkpoint incident at Norfolk Naval Base had revealed more than classified tattoo work. It had uncovered a community of people who'd been building on her sacrifice without knowing her name, protecting others using methodology she'd proven, and waiting 3 years for the opportunity to welcome her home. Ellen Clarkson had tried to disappear into civilian anonymity, but her embedded intelligence had made her disappearance impossible. Instead, it had made her indispensable to a community that finally understood what they owed her and what she could teach them about the true meaning of commitment to mission success. The experimental modification that had ended her original military career had become the foundation for a new kind of service, one that honored both the sacrifice required and the lives protected by someone willing to carry the mission permanently inscribed in her skin. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.